All right. Welcome back to another week of the IOGA podcast, all your outfitter and guide information that we know you are all just itching to hear and, basically try and get through your long drives, as we were told last night by an avid listener. This is how he survives the windshield time of outfitter life. I am Erik Weiseth, Executive Director.
And I'm Jack Hurty, Policy Director.
This week, Jack has an interview. Jack, who are you talking to this week?
Yeah, I talked to John Robison. He's the Public Lands and Wildlife Director for the Idaho Conservation League. He's been working on public lands issues in Idaho for, I think, dang near 25 years now. We talked about public lands, some stuff he's working on. In particular, we talked about kind of efforts he's been making towards collaborative conservation. John was a big part of the Owyhee Initiative, along with IOGA and Grant Simons. And I think he's really learned a lot about how to do conservation with people that he might not agree with. So it's a pretty interesting podcast. I hope people will take a listen.
Yeah, it was really fun. Jack and I last night, we were down here, I was down here in Boise, and so we went to a presentation on the Owyahees. And, one of the presenters was our own Seth Tonsmeyer, talking about basically growing up down there on Jarbidge Bruno, the Owyahees, and the trips they run. But one of the other presenters was John. And I thought it was really interesting just getting to hear, I knew IOJ and Grant had been super active in the efforts to protect the Owyahees and everything else, but then hearing John's side of that coin and everything that they did to make that happen. And then also hearing him talk about the relationship building and working with folks who, on 99 out of 100 issues, you don't align, but working to find that one thing where you have that commonality and then building relationships from there. In some ways, here in the outfitters and guides side, a lot of that's sort of second nature and natural to us just because of the diversity of our group. But I found it really inspiring and just really interesting to hear him talk about that and how he kind of came to an understanding of how you develop those relationships.
All right. Well, Erik, you just got back from DC, huh? How was that?
Yeah, it was cool. Camp Washington with America Outdoors. I think just a big shout out to Aaron and Karen over there and the week that they organized. It was awesome. It was awesome. I hadn't been to DC since I was like a seventh grader. So it was that was cool to just kind of go and see the place and everything else. That was fun. But as far as an actual event and getting the work done, they put together a great event. They had great agendas. They had, the number of meetings and the breadth of folks that we met with, because we had outfitters from literally all over the country. And so we had meetings with both House members and Senate members from all over the country. We also met with, up to the deputy level at DOI and the, what's the deputy chief of the Forest Service. So about as high up the ladder as you can get over there at the Forest Service. And that meeting was awesome. But yeah, the America Outdoors folks put on a great event. We had a strong Idaho contingent. Would love to even have more folks from Idaho next year. And it's well worth doing. Really cool thing to just participate in sort of our democratic process and advocate for the industry. I think a couple highlights that I would just bring up to folks is one, working on the Org Act, which is taking on sort of the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act issue that we all know has been an issue in this industry, and how we compensate guides, especially ones who work in the backcountry, and dealing with kind of overtime rules and everything else that just don't make sense in this space. And we talked to legislators from the breadth of the political spectrum from across different states. Obviously, our folks, the most meetings I went to was with the Idaho contingent, and they've heard it before. They get it. It makes sense to them. I think they'd sign on. We are trying to make this a bipartisan push. And so we met, members of the folks that were there met with a number of Democratic senators, especially, and House members, both. And we had more positive meetings and more positive movement on the Democrat side than I think we've had maybe ever. And really, we all left really feeling like we made some momentum on this, and that, it has always felt like this kind of, we're pushing a ball up an impossible hill. And all of a sudden it feels like maybe there's some momentum to actually make something happen here. Who knows? There's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of relationships to build and trying to get things going, but it was great. Like I said, the meetings with the Forest Service leadership were awesome. One of my big takeaways from that was that hopefully, I think their exact words were days to weeks, we should be maybe hearing about the Forest Service restructure and how that's going to play out, because we were told months ago that that is going to happen, that they're moving away from the regions into some other model, but we haven't really known what that model is going to be. And it sounds like we're going to start hearing that soon. Some of the things I have heard kind of in the back channels are pretty exciting on that front. TBD, but we should know more in the near future. I think one of the other big sort of takeaways for me personally with the week out there in DC was the meeting with Senator Risch. He actually came in, sat down with us for 15 minutes or so. And from the moment he sat down, he sat down, we said hi, and then he just jumped straight into, and this is not an exact quote, but it's as close as I can. Public lands aren't going anywhere. We're not going to sell public lands. Public lands are going to stay in public hands and stay in federal hands. And, talked about how he is going to vote for the Pierce nomination, or had voted for the Pierce nomination at that point, because he felt like he is qualified to do the job, but that he had talked to him and that there's a very strong understanding that those public lands aren't going anywhere. And if he decides to, if Pierce decides to start trying to get rid of public lands, that Risch is going to walk over to the White House and get him fired.
I do believe that.
It was like the very first thing. He just kind of like 5 minutes of just how strongly he believes and supports in public lands staying where they are. So that was really reassuring and felt really good to hear. So even if you didn't love the Pierce nomination, hearing the senator just like unsolicited, unpushed, he knew his audience. I guess he is a politician, but it was good.
Well, I'm glad. I'm happy to hear it. And you guys all stayed in the same Airbnb?
So there was a bunch of us that did. Yeah, no, there was people who definitely stayed at the hotel because the house, we kind of, I think, moved on the house a little late. So there was only space for like 12 of us, which, but I'm like on the airline flying there and I start getting texts from Aaron. He's like, hey man, it sounds like we're sharing a bed. It's like, cool. This will be great. Like back in guiding days, we're going backwards in life.
No, exactly what I was thinking.
But no, it was super fun having the house together. We did a big dinner where instead of like going out to a restaurant with everybody, we, cooked in and had everybody there. And it was awesome. Awesome atmosphere, having a place together, having a bunch of guides and outfitters from all over the country, sharing a house in DC and roaming around town, like all learning how to use those little Lime scooters and ride around town and stuff was pretty fun. So yeah, it's a good time. Outfitters go into the city. It was a good time.
Love it. Yeah, cool, man. Well, sounds like some good work, really just chipping away. The slow boring of hard boards, right?
Yep. Yeah. What's the hard work but unsexy, or whatever Aaron likes to say?
Yeah. Deep, very important, but deeply unsexy.
Yeah. There's a lot of that for sure. So
cool.
Sweet.
Well,
yeah.
Speaking of public lands, we've got a kind of a new report that's coming out March 20th, looking at the economic impact of transferring federally owned public lands to the state. This is a report that was developed in partnership with IOGA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Idaho Wildlife Federation, and Idaho Business for the Outdoors. We got economist Steve Peterson to do it. So we'll have some more kind of blogs and videos going into some more of the details, but I did want to talk some top line numbers for everyone because I do think they're pretty impactful. So the study really just looked at like a pretty cut and dry assumption of what kind of spending the state would take on if it were to take on ownership of public lands. So when we look at what the federal government spends right now, we'd be talking about shifting a cost of about $837 million directly to the state budget. So right now, that's money that the feds are spending. That's money coming in from out of state and coming from 350 million American taxpayers. Shifting that burden onto the Idaho taxpayers, I think it's safe to say that that would put immense pressure on the state budget. So that's about 15% of the current budget. Just logically from there, we can assume the state would be kind of forced to do a few different things. They'd have to raise taxes. They'd have to cut spending in other areas. They'd have to pivot to generate maximum revenue on those lands. And I think we should say that with the caveat that a lot of those lands aren't necessarily profitable revenue generators. We're looking at mountainous, poor timber quality, remote wilderness areas that, It's a little bit different from kind of front country timber parcels that the state currently owns. So it's hard to say whether or not they'd be able to generate much revenue on that. There's been studies done in the past on that basically found that at best the state could break even on that. So, without the ability to generate real significant revenue on that land, the end game would be that the state would end up selling significant chunks of this land. And, they'd have to sell it at whatever price they could get it for. So a lot of this could end up going, extremely cheaply to some large buyers that can afford to foot that cost. Obviously that kind of transfer would have immense consequences for outfitters and guides. Not just, the finances, having your taxes go up or having budgets be slashed, but also, permitting, access points, trail maintenance. There's a ton of open questions about what that might look like in this hypothetical scenario. So I think it's a really helpful report. It's very focused on the numbers. So there's no rhetoric. There's no kind of partisanship in the report, just trying to quantify the financial effects. So I'll have some more for you on that soon. The full report will be out, like I said, on March 20th. I think we're going to have a little event down in Boise. So keep y'all updated.
It's awesome. I think that's the more we have data to really demonstrate, you know, what the reality is of the state taking over federal land, good or bad, is just that way we can have honest conversations free of sort of the emotional pieces and talk about what it would actually mean for the state, especially at a time where I don't know if budget crisis is the right word, but certainly budgets are a thing that's on the mind from a state financial situation. So thanks for sharing. And from what I read of it, it's really great, really good information, and look forward to seeing the full thing. So, on to a couple other things we have going on here at IOGA land. So this last Monday, we had a meeting with SNRA, so SNRA outfitters and the Forest Service leadership. This is the second such meeting that we've had since I came into being executive director, and since the new leadership came into the SNRA. Yeah, one of the things that was really noticeable in this meeting, if you go back, say, 18 months, the relationship between leadership at the agency and outfitters was pretty contentious. I would argue one of the more contentious probably in the state. And it's like a 180-degree turn. Like, it was a really productive meeting. We have great relationships. It feels like we're talking about meaningful ways to improve the public experience on the SNRA for outfitters to participate and work with the agency on facilities, fixing, trail clearing, all sorts of other projects, and just having like good, productive conversations where we both, have the goal of working with the public and helping the public fall in love with these places and protecting these places. And it was just a really good conversation. We talked about the SNRA is looking to adopt and work with and take on some of the trail stewardship program. Like, really, they had one outfitter working it last year as kind of a test case, but looking to expand that and trying to explain to outfitters what that actually is and how they can go in and do projects on the forest like clear trail and apply that time towards the fees that they would have to pay as part of their 3% use fees. So it's been a really positive program on other forests for just getting stuff done to serve the public on that forest, getting trails cleared, facilities fixed, those kinds of things. And it was really the first exposure I think a lot of outfitters on the SNRA had to the program and understanding what it was. And you could just see the light bulbs of like, whoa, I'm already clearing that trail. Or, hey, I really want to get this fixed. So if I can actually go do that through this program. And so just a lot of really cool conversations. We heard about their active forest management projects coming up, where they're doing trail or forest thinning and sort of fire prep and that kind of stuff. So like active forest management, I think is as they call it, which was really great. We had conversations about how are we managing people on the SNRA. Is like, I think it's been a pretty common story of the SNRA being overrun since COVID, and conversations around how the forest doesn't even really understand how dispersed camping is happening on the forest or where it's happening and the impacts it's making and all of those kinds of things, and ways that outfitters can work with them to help document all of that and provide that information so that more holistic travel management plans can happen and those kinds of things. And then we also just got to hear about the realities of their staffing situation, which actually they sounded better off than I thought they would. So still not great. That actually reminds me of one of the things I meant to say related to the trip to DC. one of the experiences we had in DC, especially we went to this happens when we went to the Forest Service office to meet with the deputy chief, is we went up to, hop on the elevator, walked up the stairs, whatever, to the 3rd or 4th floor, wherever the chief's office is. And on that floor, there's probably like 100 desks, like cubicles where people work. And you're walking towards the back where the chief's office is, and literally the lights are off. Every desk is empty. There's just nobody there. And it was like, all of us that went talked about this for the next 3 days, about how sort of it was this visualization of what we suspect the agency is like overall, or feels like. It just was empty and kind of creepy. Like, there's all this infrastructure for all these employees who are just no longer there. And so I think my expectation coming into this SNRA meeting was to hear something similar, but they actually sound like they're doing better than that analogy would lead me to believe. They actually get to hire one employee, like one full-time employee, to replace somebody, which is exciting. And they're able to hire, I think, 8 seasonals, which is 8 more than the 0 they were able to hire last year. So that part was exciting. Another upcoming outfitter meeting we have, outfitter agency meeting, is the Nez Clear. So if you're a Nez Clear outfitter, April 7th, we are going to be meeting with the Forest Service leadership in Orofino this year. So get that on your calendar. And the North Idaho IOGA chapter is going to host an event. It looks like the evening of the 6th. So we'll have an evening of the 6th chapter meeting, and then all-day meeting on the 7th with agency folks. Licensing board sounds like they're going to come up. We're working on that agenda right now. But these outfitter agency meetings, in all of my years of being an outfitter, I just think these are one of the most important things. That opportunity to get down, sit face-to-face with your permanent administrators and folks running the forest, have them hear you, have you hear them, get updates on what's going on. It is essential to having a vibrant outfitting community, is having good relationships with these folks. And this is the cornerstone of doing that. And so one of the things I think of as IOGA, this is one of the most important things we do, is help facilitate these opportunities for these face-to-face meetings and everything. So if you're a Nez Clear outfitter, block off your calendar for April 7th. Make sure you make it to this meeting. These are just wildly important for the long-term health and viability of the industry and your business. Yeah.
Well, you make it sound really cool. It makes me want to be a Nez Clear outfitter.
They are cool. Well, I think being a Nez Clear outfitter is cool. It's rad up there. I'm excited to go hang out with all those folks. It's like the part of the state I've spent the least amount of time in, I think. And so I'm really hoping to spend more time up in that neck of the woods, because it's awesome up there.
Cool. Yeah. And, I want to give a special plug for the Trail Stewardship Act, because I know it's cool to hear that they're trying to expand the use. I know it's been really effective in the Salmon Chalice for getting some stuff done that would have been devastating otherwise.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, cool. Jack, well, let's talk legislative updates, huh?
Yeah. So, the legislature is kind of winding down, or at least they want to be winding down. There's been a few bills that we've been watching that have moved. A lot of bills we've been watching that haven't moved. We'll start with the good news. SJM 111 has passed unanimously out of the Senate. This is the resolution basically proclaiming the support from the Idaho State Legislature for keeping public lands in public hands, and emphatically stating the value of public lands to Idaho and the people of Idaho. There's kind of something for everyone in there. So yeah, this went just for a voice vote on the floor of the Senate, and everyone voted yes. There was no objections to it. So it'll go to the House now, and I think we expect to see it pass there, although I'd be surprised if it was unanimous on the House side.
It's awesome. It's basically the state of Idaho. Formally what this would be is the state of Idaho saying, we as the state of Idaho believe public land should stay in public hands, and sending that up to our federal delegation as a statement of, listen, you represent us and this is what we believe, in a very formal, sort of powerful voice. So it's awesome.
Yep. Very similar to the membership resolution that IOGA members passed 2024.
Yeah.
Okay, Now for the bad news, Erik.
Senate Bill 1238, the open fields bill, is back again. From my understanding, this has been bouncing around for a couple of years. And Jack, you're going to have to help me with this, but from my understanding, what this does is it essentially blocks off law enforcement, but specifically Fish and Game, from being able to go onto private land for enforcement efforts without a judicial warrant. Right now, if they're driving past some huge ranch and they see somebody parked on the side of the road and they're just on the other side of the fence fishing, they can, look up that person's license plate and see if they have a fishing license or reason to believe that person has a fishing license. And if that person doesn't have, it would indicate that it doesn't look like they have a fishing license. They can hop across the fence because they have probable cause and go check that person for their fishing license. And then also probably deal with the fact that they're trespassing. This would change it so they literally, even if they see somebody poaching on private land, they cannot hop across the fence and go cite them or do anything.
Yeah,
They're
they'd have
pretty
to go
strictly
get a
prohibited from
warrant.
doing anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something we're pretty concerned about for sure. Jack, did I get that? You have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. The first is that that this really goes back to the North American model of wildlife, which wildlife is kind of public trust resource that the state manages. So conservation officers have had kind of the unique privilege and real unique responsibility in being able to basically go onto private property to investigate wildlife crimes. This is going to make that significantly harder. I understand, like there's definitely some legitimate concerns about law enforcement officers going onto private property without a warrant. And I think, I guess personally, I'm sympathetic to that, but I also think that, this bill, the way it's written, it's gonna create more opportunities for poaching. Like, there's no way around that. It also imposes a civil, like, it'll make COs personally liable for, trespassing in the line of duty that no other state peace officer is subject to. A state trooper, sheriff, just a regular police officer, they sometimes they make mistakes, and they are typically not held personally liable for that. But this would make it so that a CO could be personally
Conservation
fined. Not,
officer.
yeah, a conservation officer could be personally fined. So there's some problems with that from like a judicial and constitutional point of view. Yeah, also just I think have concerns about being able to investigate wildlife crimes, but yeah,
Well, at the
that's
end of
kind of my 2 cents on it.
I think at the end of the day, there's just no way around the reality that this will create poaching islands. Like, you will know that you could poach on private land because there is no enforcement will not be a thing anymore. That seems like the inevitable outcome of this if it goes forward. So it's something we are watching, paying attention to, and going to be advocating against. So that is that one. So there you go. Fun stuff happening down here. Another one that just popped its head up that we are very much paying attention to and will be advocating against is House Bill 861. This one's kind of funny because it's in a committee we don't pay a whole lot of attention to, but this legislation would amend how tourism dollars acquired through the lodging tax are spent. So currently, that money that comes in through the lodging tax, half of that goes to the ITC grant program, of which IOGA is a beneficiary. We get money from the ITC to promote outfitters and guides, our members here in the state of Idaho. And then the other half of those funds go to Visit Idaho for them to use promoting tourism in Idaho, as Idaho being a great destination to come and go rafting or whatever. Those who saw the 3100, that's where that money would have come from. Visit Idaho, just basically everything Visit Idaho does comes through this program. Well, that money that goes to Visit Idaho to promote the state, to bring people here so that they can, learn about going rafting on the main or going to the lower, or learning that Riggins is the whitewater capital and coming on river trips, or promoting our hunting, fishing, etc. So they do a ton of work to promote our state as one of the great places to come for outdoor recreation. Well, they would lose potentially up to half of their budget because it would now qualify universities to be able to take that money for the purposes of economic development. So right now, those funds are really limited to use to promoting tourism here in Idaho. And it would broaden that scope to economic development, which can mean a whole host of things. And it would allow universities to come in and get in on that. So the inevitable reality, if this was to go through, is half of what would be today, half of the budget promoting our industry and our state as a tourism destination would basically go away. And we think this is a really dangerous thing. It's robbing our future for the sake of paying our bills today. Because we stop marketing the state, it's going to have a long-term reduction in tax revenue. So it's just going to make the fiscal situation worse. We are sympathetic to universities whose budgets are in some pretty tight spots, but stealing from the future is not a good way to solve the university budget problems. And that's what this would be doing. It also kind of, I think, is pretty disingenuous to take from tourism promotion dollars and provide them to universities for kind of all sorts of other things. So it's something we're watching and something we will be pretty actively speaking against in the mechanisms that we need to. Let's go to the next one here. Senate Bill 1300. Jack, you want that one or you want me?
Sure. I mean, there's not too much to update there. We talked about this, I think, last time on this podcast. This bill would make the director of Fish and Game, Parks and Rec, and the Transportation Department governor appointed positions that are confirmed by the Senate. We have some real concerns about what that would do, to state Fish and Game and potentially politicizing the agency even more. There's some other concerns about, how this would play into the grant of Harriman State Park to the state, and it could potentially lead to the state losing Harriman State Park. So it passed through the Senate committee. We're waiting for it to resurface. It passed through the Senate, waiting for it to resurface on the House side. And I think we'll continue to oppose this because it just doesn't seem to be accomplishing what it's setting out to do, in my opinion. So.
Yep. It does seem like the issue about Harriman Park has really picked up a lot of steam. Like that may actually be starting to be viewed as a pretty big deal. And the fact that it hasn't had a hearing makes me sort of think that maybe that is people are looking into that more in a pretty firm or hard way.
Yeah.
So we'll keep you updated on what we see.
That could be $150 million mistake.
Yeah. Yep. The last thing I think that we'll update you on going on down there is the Fish and Game rules that related to technology specifically. I mean, there's a ton of them, but the one specifically related to technology has finally had hearings on both the Senate and House side. Jack, you got to sit in on the House side earlier this week. Well, what was your takeaway from that experience?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. There was honestly a lot of people that were there to testify and seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm for the tech rules. So they kind of went through a few things. They had a hard stop at 3:00, and then they had to go. All the members had to get to the floor. So they kind of rushed through the testimony a little bit. Everyone was limited to a minute, which I think normally they get 2 or 3 minutes. But I would say it was like 90% in favor of the tech rules. And a lot of people had driven in from pretty much all over the state to testify in favor of the tech rules. They had testimony from a couple of young women, like 14-year-olds, that came in to testify, which is always cool to see, like when kids get involved, kind of testifying on the future of their state. And then right at 3:00, right when they finished the testimony, they cut it off and didn't vote. So they had to go to the floor and did not get a chance to vote on whether or not to proceed to move the legislation out of committee. So yeah, that was a little bit of a bummer to see all this, kind of all these people take the time and the effort to come to Boise to make their voices heard, and then kind of we'll see what happens with the legislation now. I'm sure they'll bring it back up for a vote, but it's not the same as having all that testimony and then having to make the decision then and there. It's just going to change the dynamics. So yeah, but yeah, I'm not sure when that's going to get a vote. Haven't seen it. They did not address it in the committee hearing. That was yesterday. It seemed like they had a lot of other things related to water that they needed to do. So maybe next week.
Yeah, it sounds like it's sitting on both sides in sort of the same way. The hearings have happened, but nothing's going on. So it'll be interesting to see where that one goes. I think the final sort of update we have here before we get you to the interview is we had, just for those who are interested in kind of hunt tag allocation, the hunt tag allocation group had another meeting with Fish and Game yesterday. And I think we're really starting to put some concrete ideas on the table and really going to start talking details of how we move this thing forward to get capped hunts recalculated and also tackle this idea of non-resident reduction and keeping outfitters whole. Super positive meeting. everybody really feels good about a couple of the different directions we're talking about, and we'll have some more updates on that as it's appropriate. But just if that's kind of your space, just know that we're moving the ball forward as always on that one. But actually really moving the ball forward now. We're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes piece of this. So really good stuff. Awesome. Well, I think, Jack, that gets you to the interview. Anything you want to tell people before we hop in here, other than John's rad and
Yeah.
could be a good time?
Yeah. Take a lesson, learn about, how we can build constructive outcomes, not just stop bad things from happening, because those are very different things. So,
Awesome. Well, here is Jack's interview with John Robison of ICL.
okay. All right.
All right.
John Robison, welcome to the podcast, man. Glad to have you on here.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, where are you right now? You in Boise?
Yeah, I'm in Boise at the ICL office. And we actually have offices also in McCall and up in Ketchum and up in Sandpoint. And so every so often I get to go visit some of those other offices and meet the folks up there and get to spend a little time on the water up there out in the woods. So yeah, it's nice to be able to get around. But today I'm here in Boise and it's a amazing spring day out there.
Yep. Gonna be 80 degrees next week. Cool. Well, John, you mind just giving us a little intro on who you are, who you work for, what you do?
Sure. My name is John Robison, and I'm the Public Lands and Wildlife Director for the Idaho Conservation League. ICL is a statewide nonprofit conservation group. We've been around since 1973, and our mission is to protect the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the land and wildlife you love. And we work on a whole host of conservation issues in Idaho and really try to figure out enduring, pragmatic solutions that work for the landscape, that work for the people, and that work for our kids.
Cool. And you've been there for a number of years, right?
Yeah, I first started back in 2002, and so it's been a wild ride and a good one.
Cool. And you're mostly focused on public lands.
Yeah, so I work most of my work is generated by the Forest Service or BLM, and here in Idaho we're lucky enough to have, almost 2/3 of Idaho as public land. And so the public really has an amazing say in what happens in our landscape. I wasn't lucky enough to grow up in Idaho. My father was in the Navy, so I did the tour and grew up on the East Coast, which was, a great place to grow up by the ocean in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And North Carolina has some great public lands and seashores, national seashores, but a lot of the area out there is private, and you just don't have a say and the sense of ownership and stewardship that we do here.
Okay. And then we were at a presentation of yours the other night. You mentioned that the first day you ever came to Idaho was to kayak the Owyhee. Is that it?
Actually, it was the Bruno River.
Bruno.
And I had been working as a river guide and back east for the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, come on out to Idaho and let's go kayaking." And I was like, "Where? What?" And we did this phenomenal dirt bag kayak trip. There were four of us in his, 1980 Ford Ranger pickup. We
Nice.
drove out here. It was a couple of days, and one of us had to ride in the back, with the smelly neoprene, and it was camping out in the desert. And back then, you could get the way there were river gauges, but you had to call in and go through the whole line of options and listen to the whole list to have a little notebook, about what the levels are. And I remember pulling over to a payphone in Nevada to find out what the levels were. And the Bruno River was running at a good level. And so came out here and paddled the Bruno and 11 other or 10 other rivers in 11 days, had a phenomenal time. The Bruno River was like nothing else I had seen.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it was an overnight trip and self-support kayak, and it just blew my mind. And then afterwards, I kept guiding, and in the off seasons, I was able to travel, lucky enough to travel a bit. So I got to paddle rivers in Pakistan and Nepal and Chile and New Zealand over the years. And then I came back in 2001 and paddled the Bruner River again for the second time. And it was even more impressive. Like, no, this really is a world quality river out there, and the canyon and the desert and the experience. And then I was lucky enough to get a job with the Idaho Conservation League working on public lands issues. And this collaborative had started to try to figure out basically what to do with the Bruner River and the Owyhee River and the
Mm-hmm.
surrounding areas that had, there are important issues regarding access and uncertainties. There was discussions about how to protect the landscape, what flexibility we need. And so I got to work on actually a campaign to protect the Bruner River as a wild and scenic river, and got to go back to DC with the folks from the Owyhee Initiative, this collaborative group. So we had folks, the ranchers back there, recreationists, and outfitters and guides. And the outfitters and guides played an outsized role in terms of really figuring out the access issues for the rivers, the put-ins for chucker hunting, the whole thing. Um, and and also how to protect the landscape. And so eventually, it in 2009, Senator Crapo championed a bill to protect most amazing parts, the most deserving parts of the Owyhee Canyonlands as wilderness and wild and scenic rivers, and then also allowed flexibility for management in other areas that the ranchers wanted, and also secured access. And so there was certainty about the access issues, and really rallied around the community's vision for open space in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was just one thing where back in, who knew that this little dirt bag kayaking trip, would lead to me getting engaged in this amazing effort. And then last year, I got to uh, uh, kayak the Bruner River again with my same friend that I went with in 1991.
Nice.
And, since 1991, a lot of things have changed, and, so many places, are now developed,
Mm-hmm.
or, rivers that I paddled back in the 90s are now dammed and now slackwater reservoirs. Places that I hiked, have been mined
Mm-hmm.
and have issues there. So we've got, lots of things changing, other development and loss of open space. But going back to the Bruner River, it was just the same portal. And it was just like, and it was like the unknown down there. I mean, every trip is an adventure. And so it was so cool to see that the next generation of folks could come out there and have that same uh, um, adventure and experience with the wild and the unknown, and just experience one of the few kind of blank spots on the map, so to speak.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, that area is just absolutely incredible. And I think, one thing we talk about a lot is the way that, your experience out there can transform people into really strong advocates for those places. So it's cool to hear from, one of the maybe most outspoken public lands advocates in Idaho, that was maybe your foot in the door.
Yeah, it really was. And the other thing I was going to say is that it really certainly changed my, or helped me figure out how to be a better voice for the landscape,
Hmm.
but also form partnerships and relationships and friendships with people from very different perspectives who also cared for the landscape in their own ways. So thinking about folks, certainly outfitters and guides, and they have an incredible relationship with the landscape and know it so well, and and are really just great at introducing people to the landscape and to the rivers that would never otherwise get there. And then also folks from the ranching community that really, care about the landscape there and want to keep it open and undisturbed, as well as members the Shoshone Paiute tribe and their connection to the landscape since time immemorial. And then you have all the different recreationists out there, from hunters and motorized recreationists and river runners, that really also value the landscape in their own ways, and really want to keep it the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go kind of talk a bit more about the Owyhee Initiative and kind of how it
Yeah.
got started because, for someone like me and some of our younger listeners, like I was 10 years old when that bill was signed into law. And I think, I look back and see that initiative as like a really good model for how to do conservation in this day and age when it feels like everyone is so polarized. So, yeah, you were a big part of that. Grant Simons was a big part of that. They actually still
Yeah,
talk about Grant down in Owyhee County, as you
totally.
know.
Yeah,
So
he's a
yeah,
legend.
yeah, I'd love to hear kind of your story of how that came together, because I think it was really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I was kinda came in when it had already gotten going, but, there were controversies out there and big debates for decades about how to manage the landscape and how to balance access and recreation and ranching and all these things. And a lot of it was high centered. And
Mhm.
the BLM, had was hard for them to implement things. There was lots of litigation, particularly over grazing issues, and there was a lot of sense of how that it was just kind of the old west, and the range
Mhm.
wars and things like that. And there were lots of visions, that people had for the landscape. They tried to kind of impose on others, or try to say, well, we have a solution here. Let's go with this. So you had at some point, in the past, you had like the sagebrush rebellion, like, hey, we're just going to
Mhm.
privatize all that, and people didn't think that was a good idea. People really liked their public lands. And so that didn't go anywhere. And then you had discussions about there was a proposal for an Air Force bombing range out there with live ammunition. And that actually concerned everyone. And so that was the first kind of line of communication between the ranchers and the conservationists and the river runners. Now, first saying, wait, I'm not sure if Dick Shooter Ridge is a really great place for live bombs to drop from a whole host of reasons. And so there was actually litigation against the Air Force at the time and a collaborative pushback or a coalition pushback. Then, and that was settled, and the Air Force, was able to continue in a way that wasn't everything they wanted, but they got some things, and there was some give and take. But the large landscape got preserved and protected. Um, and then there was and some excitement in the conservation community about the possibility of a national monument in the area that wouldn't be wilderness, but it would be more flexible than wilderness,
Mhm.
but would still preserve the landscape. And there wasn't a lot of strong comfort level from Owyhee County about monuments and what they mean and might not mean and all these things. So there was pushback for the monument. It didn't get across the finish line. I think it was pretty close, but it wasn't seen as a collaborative solution. And there's just too much uncertainty about it at the time. Monuments have been very successful in other venues, with other support levels and community involvement. So the monument didn't cross the finish line, but the landscape was still there, the issues were still there, the stakeholders were still there. No one was going anywhere, and everyone had a lot of concern about what the future held. And that was one of the things where we're talking about polarization and what brings folks together.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of things. I think there's a bit of a what out there represents common ground.
Mhm.
And we weren't sure what there was. Well, we knew that people didn't like the live bombing out there, and everyone kind of, was concerned about that. So that was something, but we didn't know exactly what the solution was that would work. And so full credit goes to the Owyhee County commissioners who, the BLM, they do these resource management plans every, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And so we're in the midst of that. The BLM wasn't going to change anything or make any resolution there. And only Congress can solve some of these things, like designating wilderness or releasing wilderness study areas. So, and people didn't feel comfortable waiting, for the next resource management plan revision for this area. And so Hawaii County said, okay, why don't we just have a conversation with folks? Why don't we just reach out to these conservationists out there and see what they really want? Uh, and uh, and so this was the beginning where the commissioners invited folks from the Idaho Conservation League, the Wilderness Society, Idaho Rivers United, Idaho Outfitters and Guides, as well as folks from the Farm Bureau and the Owyhee Borderlands Trust. And you had folks from the local Southern Idaho Desert Racing Association. And so just bring all these folks together. And these are people that had never been in the same room together. And the fellow leading this, gentleman named by Fred Kelly Grant, he actually had assigned seating. So you'd have someone from the Sierra Club sit next to the local rancher, sit next to the person from ICL, sitting next to folks from the Farm Bureau, and like we're going to really get together and figure this out there. So immediately, we're trying to defuse and break apart the cliques and the tribalism and have some conversations. And those first meetings were, I wasn't there at the time, but they're, a little tense sometimes, not a lot
Hmm.
of trust there. Um, and so we say is it takes like 1,000 cups of coffee.
Right.
And so imagine those meetings and then imagine field trips and imagine the stories. And then you imagine, the time spent out on the rangelands and over the canyons. And then imagine, getting folks together for a meal and looking at maps over a coffee table. So it turned out, everyone had their initial, I know the solution, here's what it is. And people didn't like that one. But then we went around basically around the room and everyone really wanted to keep it the same. We wanted to keep the landscape the same. We wanted to keep the rural economy the same. We wanted to provide stability and certainty there. And it turns out that none of these visions were mutually exclusive. We're
Hmm.
all using the landscape differently. And we wanted to, not excuse, poor management practices or things that weren't good, but assuming good stewardship on the landscape, we figured out there is room for everyone there. And everyone just needed a little more certainty. So that's where we came up with what's called the Owyhee Initiative Agreement. And so basically a list of common shared goals where we said, hey, here's our kind of North Star in terms of getting where we want the landscape to be, how we want to keep it open space and unfragmented, how we want to make sure that the ranching communities kept whole. We want to protect cultural resources and local businesses, including outfitters and guides. And it came up with kind of a wish list, if you will. And the commissioners and the Owyhee Initiative had reached out to our congressional delegation saying, hey, we've got a vision for the landscape. It's a shared vision. What do you think? And it was Senator Crapo that responded and said, wow, actually, it looks like you have something there. And so Senator Crapo and his staff helped shepherd this through transforming our laundry list, our wish list, into legislation. Now, not all the pieces in our wish list could make it to legislation. This wasn't suitable for it. It wasn't quite the right format, but some things did. And so the legislation is really good at doing certain things. And so we came up with a consensus proposal for what areas should be wilderness and what areas should be not, and which access areas should stay open. And so at the end of the day, there's a bill introduced that would designate 517,000 acres as wilderness. And these are in the most deserving places in the landscape. So you've got Big Jacks and Little Jacks Creek Wilderness. You've got the Owyhee River Wilderness, the Bruno Jarbidge Wilderness, the North Fork Wilderness, Pole Creek Wilderness. And these areas, I mean, the landscape, but for folks who haven't, um, we call the area out there kind of like the sagebrush sea,
Hmm.
where you're driving, and it actually might, or riding, it might be faster on a horseback sometimes, through this amazing rolling landscape of sagebrush, mountain mahogany, clumps of juniper. You've got elk out there. You've got mule deer. You've got one of the best last strongholds for sage grouse. And then out of nowhere, you come across a precipice and there's this sheer canyon wall dropping down hundreds of feet that was totally hidden from the landscape. And you look down there between all the rock spires and the juniper and things, and you see this little silver ribbon at the bottom of it. And so these are the river systems out there and the areas where it's incredible habitat in the canyons for bighorn sheep. And again, a bighorn sheep historic stronghold and great habitat out there. And then there's native red band trout in these creeks. And then a lot of these creeks have incredible whitewater and river floating opportunities out there, everything from class 2 to class 5 plus. And so this is a incredible landscape that everyone came together and said, okay, let's recommend that we're going to recommend over 16 different stretches, of rivers for wild and scenic designation, the gold standard of protections for rivers. and totaling up over 316 miles of wild and scenic rivers. So that was the protection aspect of it. At the same time, we're going to designate these cherry stems. So these are routes that you can drive your truck on with wilderness on either side. So you can go through the wilderness to get to the overlook or get to the trailhead or get to the river access point to put in or take out. And then in terms of flexibility, we also we're able to agree on releasing about 199,000 acres of wilderness study areas that the BLM had set aside until Congress decided. And so the ranchers really wanted to have those areas open to more flexible management, including like
Hmm.
juniper treatments and things like that. And so that was part of the agreement as well. So there were other elements where we got some funding for cultural resource protections and for some rangeland studies and things like that, and a bunch of other things that we followed through with afterwards for things like a land exchange with the state of Idaho and the BLM to consolidate the ownership. So, sorry. So we actually had a good amount of, this is a very significant package, and it actually was signed into law in 2009. So it took kind of 8 years from the beginning, from the inception of it to
Hmm.
that. And we're still following through with the expectations and intent of that today. So that was a success story that really also inspired other efforts, such as how do we engage in things like, forest management with the Idaho Roadless Rule or forest restoration collaboratives to restore our forest and use active management. It was helped apply and inform the Boulder White Clouds Wilderness. So trying to figure out how to balance access and wilderness protections. And it really, for us, certainly showed a whole new way to engage on
Hmm.
public lands advocacy and a whole new set of skills that have become increasingly important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's really good. Really interesting to think about. And I want to kind of, I think, maybe tease out something that I've heard you say before, in that all these different groups, whether the ranchers, the motorized users, guides, conservationists, people that just live there, right? They all were looking at the landscape and seeing different things, even though, they're looking at the same actual land, but they're kind of thinking about and wanting different things from that land.
Right.
But at the end
Right.
of the day, like at a high level, the visions were not, incompatible. And I think that's something that's true for, it's not just the Owyahees. I think it's really true for a lot of places in Idaho and across the West. Is like, I think, like you said, a lot of people just want to see it stay the same,
Hmm.
or they want to see it get better. And
Hmm.
and the ways that it gets better are usually not incompatible. Obviously, there's always tension, but yeah, I think the Owyhee Initiative is so interesting because it is a really good example of crossing those lines. And I also think it's like, an example of why it's worth it to try and build constructive things, even though they're a lot harder to do, right? Like it's a lot easier to kind of
Right.
divide people and try and rip something down, or to stop, something from happening. It's much more difficult to build something. And that's, yeah, I think that's what makes it such a powerful example. So,
Well, also it really, that attitude really, I think, prepared us well for when Senator Mike Lee proposed, legislation
mhm,
or that would have sold off, 2 to 3 million acres as a start of public lands, including Idaho is on the chopping block as well. And so that really would have affected not just conservation groups or outfitters and guides, but snowmobilers, dirt bikers, kayakers, rock climbers, hunters, people who are just walk their
mhm,
dogs, people, the whole gamut of everyone who enjoys Idaho would have been adversely affected. And so some of these things aren't my specialty or interest, but someone else is very passionate about them and they have a place on the landscape. And so we're able to approach that not from a kind of you know, my view is the only valuable one, but someone else has a vision as well and a connection to the landscape, and that's valued and viable and important, and it belongs. And so that's where that connection that we all have for the landscape, even though we use it and see it differently, really surpassed any differences we have. So, public
Yeah.
lands are a common ground. And we found that in the Owyhees on over, in the, we've got over a million acres out there that folks, wrestled about and came to agreement on with all things all together. And then it came together with all Idahoans saying, actually, all public lands in Idaho are important to us. And we don't think privatizing them and cutting the public off is a good idea. And we can agree to disagree later on which trails should be used for which uses or
Hmm.
how to allocate different uses and things. That's fine. We like having those discussions. That's fine. Everyone's going to, have a voice and get something out of it. But if they sell off public lands, we all lose. And that was the thing that I think the Owyhee Initiative really emphasized for folks there is that, working together, we have a lot more to gain than, being splintered in our own separate groups and potentially losing it all.
Yeah. You had a really good story the other night about I think it was a suction dredge miner that came out into the Oahees with you. I was wondering if you'd tell that really quick.
Sure. The Idaho Conservation League, we host field trips and try to get folks out in the field and connect them to the landscape. And so for years, we've had folks join us on out to check out sage grouse when they're on their strutting grounds on their leks. And this is like it's like one of these things is like watching salmon spawn in
Mhm.
like a tiny creek you can jump over. And it's like this amazing, iconic Idaho experience. And sage grouse are the same thing. These birds are out there just doing these incredibly elaborate displays with feathers and sounds and air sacs and strutting and postures and endurance. These are marathon sessions that goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks right at dawn. And the males are out there doing their thing, and the females are kind of looking, distractedly, around, kind of maybe taking a look every so often, but not giving them too much attention.
Sounds like the bar in Stanley.
It's amazing thing. There's lots of interesting parallels there potentially, but a lot of strangle. It's an amazing thing right at dawn out in these remote areas in the Owyhees, one of the strongholds. And so we had advertised that, hey, if you want to come along, check it out. And we had this gentleman come up there, and we have all types of folks join us. But this guy, had the overalls on there, and he was packing a heat, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. We see that, and how'd you hear about this? Oh, I like want to hear more about these things, and so he joined us, and he was a suction dredge miner who had actually done a lot of mining up in Alaska. And, fair to say that Idaho Conservation League has a complicated relationship with a lot of mining activities, given the practices and the impacts on resources. But you're out in the field checking out the Owyhees. And he was like, who are you people? Like, what are you talking about for wilderness? And like these sage grouse I get back. What is this? What are these boundaries? What's with BLM and like what's all this stuff? And we're stuck, we're doing the Mudflat Road loop, which is a great, they call also the Owyhee Upland Backcountry Byway. Everyone calls it Mudflat, which is, goes from Grandview out to Jordan Valley, and it's a long drive. So, we're with this guy the full time and trying to showcase him the value of wilderness. And he's scratching his head running, who are you? Are you aliens? Like, I don't get this. And then we got to a spot, and this is actually in the Pole Creek Wilderness. We walked up to this landscape, again, incredible vista going off to the horizon. It's amazing. And I said, yeah. And you were so far away from and everything here that the night skies here are brilliant. It's one of the best places where you can see the Milky Way, the entire cosmos, unfettered by light pollution. And his eyes opened up and he's like, oh, I get it now. The night sky. That was my family's connection to the outdoors.
Mm.
I get it now. I don't know about this stuff, but I get the night sky. And if this is helping protect the night sky, and I can come out here and watch the meteors, watch this, I get it. And so it was really interesting to find that connection. And, everyone has their passion, which is great. And it's been really nice to see with the Owyhees in particular, how there's something out there, as my friend Brenda Richards says. She's one of the chair of the Owyhee Initiative and a rancher out in the Owyhees, how there's something in the landscape that makes everyone's heart beat fast.
Hmm.
And it's not the same thing necessarily, but the stories where you talk about those things, that's where you build the connections. whether it's, splashing through a class 4 rapid, or it's out there and you're, turning out your cows, or you're out there and having this epic, dirt bike ride on these backcountry trails. But all of those need open space. All of those need public lands. And if we can find some ways to work together in the big picture and provide certainty for everyone, that's a good thing. And we'll continue to have disagreements over micromanaging this or trails or grazing levels, all that stuff. That's fine. But if we don't all protect the big picture, we're all going to end up getting pushed out.
I think that's a good place to end. But yeah, anything else you wanna say to Idaho Outfitters and Guides on the collaborative conservation?
Oh, I think that the role of coalitions are really now more important than ever. It used to be that the Forest Service or the BLM would have a comment period on some project, and people would get together and usually find something to argue about. And eventually, though, we found that if we really want to have good stuff happen on the landscape, it's good to talk to other parties. And so that's where we would get together with folks from the timber industry or the recreation groups or the tribes or whoever and say, hey, here's a project, potentially do something. Can what would folks like to see have happen? And is there a way to do it so everyone either gets kept whole or even improved? That trailhead gets
Mhm.
improved, that bull trout creek gets restored. There's something benefit the homeowners, the loggers. There's something in it for everyone if we're careful about it. Those comment periods that the Forest Service and BLM or have hosted in the past are disappearing. Now they're as short as 10 days, if at all. But those connections, communications with everyone on the landscape are more important than ever. And
Mhm.
so they've got these forest restoration collaboratives that are still bringing folks together with a shared vision for their watershed, for their forest, for their mills, for their trailheads, and we can still work together and present that vision to them to follow through on. So those connections are really important. And yes, we're going to disagree on whether that mountain should be turned inside out and mined or not, or whether this should be a UTV trail or a dirt bike trail or mountain bike or a footpath or a horse trail. But if we don't have those conversations and we still have these entities out that want to sell off our public land, they can scoop it away from us while we're all quibbling. And so working together with your neighbors to find as much common
Mhm.
ground as you can is going to be the way we're going to keep public lands in public hands.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it. And it seems like there's a number of these forest collaboratives across the state. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity for outfitters and guides to get involved with their local collaborative wherever you're living.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, a really good alternative to litigation, oftentimes,
Right.
because you can solve these problems much more cheaply just by talking to each other. And then, before it goes to the decision stage, those
Right.
differences are worked out. The other thing I've heard you say, JR, and I think this is really important, is that those collaborative bodies, whether or not they're accomplishing things in the moment, they build these like networks, like connective tissue in these communities. And so, when something is happening on the landscape, like someone's cows are got out and are grazing in a sensitive area, you could talk to the rancher that owns those cows before going to some kind of enforcement mechanism. And I think it's a better outcome for everybody. So,
100%. And just on that note, I'm part of the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership, which is kind of a umbrella collaborative
mhm.
support group for forest restoration efforts in Idaho. We've got a conference coming up on April 7th, 8th up in Coeur d'Alene. We're planning on having Chief Schultz, Chief of the Forest Service, there as well. It's just a way to bring folks together, talk about the upcoming policy changes, the forest health issues that need to be addressed, the restoration needs, and also just visit with each other and find out, yeah, one thing is that we might have some assumptions about other folks, and some of those, we might have areas of disagreement. But what we found is by having those conversations and working towards solutions, we can, you know, figure out a lot more of common ground and advance a lot more restoration work and management work what needs to get done. And even if we're going to agree to disagree on this issue. We have a relationship. And when the next issue comes up, we can say, hey, this seems a little different. What's your take on this? And they can say, well, actually, this is something we can probably work on with you. And that's been true time and time again, where Idaho has this amazing assortment of public lands advocates of all shapes and colors. And it's a great group. And the passion that people have for the public lands is our superpower.
Hell yeah. All right, JR. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. John Robison, ladies and gentlemen, Idaho Conservation League.
All right.
We'll see you
Thanks,
next
Jack.
time.
Really appreciate you.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to John Robison for agreeing to be interviewed. It was a great conversation, and we're just really thankful for the partnership with ICL that is just kind of ongoing, and they're good partners on protecting Idaho's public lands. We also want to say thanks to America Outdoors for setting up Camp Washington and everything that happened there. And finally, thanks to all the outfitters that show up and do the hard work, meeting with their agency partners and just kind of keeping this whole industry moving forward. So thanks. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe, tell your guide outfitter friends, and most importantly, if you're not a member of IOGA, please consider joining. It's the support of our members that allows us to continue these efforts advocating for the industry. Have a great week, and we will see you again soon.